Welcome to today's Explainer. Look, if you're an English teacher, you already know that teaching grammar is this incredibly rewarding journey. But let's be real, there are certain roadblocks that just seem to pop up in every single class. Today, we're taking on a notoriously tricky one, teaching the present simple tense. But we're not just going to look at standard, boring textbook drills here. We're going to explore how to actually master this tense using a highly effective, structured approach called the ECRIF framework.
Okay, reality check time. We've literally all been there, right? You teach the lesson, the students are nodding along, they completely ace the worksheet, and then, 5 minutes later in a speaking activity, you hear it. She don't likes coffee. Or maybe they just completely drop that elusive third-person S sound altogether. It is such a universal teacher struggle. Why do they intellectually understand the rule, but completely fail to apply it in conversation? It's this super frustrating gap between knowing and doing. And honestly, that is exactly the core problem we need to solve today.
To bridge that gap, we're going to walk through a 90-minute lesson plan built around the ECRF framework. We'll be covering Step 1, Encounter, Noticing the Language. Step 2, Clarify, Meaning, Form, Pronunciation. Step 3, Remember, Making it Stick. Step 4, Internalize, Personal Use. Step 5, Fluency Use, Spontaneous Communication. And finally, Step 6, Managing Common Student Errors. Basically, think of this whole framework as a cognitive staircase. With each step, you're gradually shifting the heavy lifting, the cognitive load, from yourself directly onto your students.
All right, let's dive right into Step 1, Encounter, Noticing the Language.
In this first stage, which should take maybe 10 to 12 minutes, the focus is entirely on noticing the target language in a natural context. And the golden rule here? They're just observing. No analyzing yet. A really fantastic way to do this is with an authentic style text. Take a look at this quote from a piece called A Day in the Life of a Flight Attendant. You'd play the audio or read the text, and first just ask a few basic questions, to make sure they get the story, like, what time does she wake up? Or why? Then you hand them the transcript with the verbs highlighted and simply ask, what do you notice? You want them working in pairs, looking at words like wake, leave, and doesn't allow, and starting to recognize these patterns entirely on their own without you throwing a bunch of grammar terminology at them.
Now, I'm going to let you in on a little secret that is actually really hard to execute. You have to resist the urge to explain the rules. I know, it's so tempting. You want to jump in and say, look guys, it's a routine, so we use the present simple. Don't do it. Let the students discover and voice their own noticing. When a student says, hey, it kind of seems like an action that happens again and again, or wait, I see an S on some of these verbs, they are literally priming their own brains for the next stage.
Once they've noticed the language, we smoothly transition into Step 2, Clarify, meaning form and pronunciation.
This is a roughly 20-minute phase where we build explicit accuracy using guided discovery rather than a boring lecture. And this timeline on the slide brilliantly illustrates the meaning aspect. Using concept checking questions, or CCQs, paired with a timeline drawn on the board is just incredibly powerful. You ask them, does she wake up at 5 a.m. only today or every day? They'll say, every day. So you draw repeated X marks across a past to future timeline to cement the idea of a habit. Then you ask, is the airline rule true only sometimes or always? They realize it's a permanent fact, which you then represent with a straight, unbroken line. It visually cements the difference between a daily habit and a general truth. It's like a giant light bulb goes off for them.
Now the next crucial point is how we tackle form. Highlight the structure super cleanly by eliciting it collaboratively. Ask your students to find these exact examples in that flight attendant text. As you build this table on the board, draw their attention to the base form versus the third-person singular S. And here's a great proactive tip for you. Intentionally write incorrect examples on the board, like she don't like coffee, and have them corrected. This proactively catches those pesky double-marking errors before they become totally ingrained in your students' habits.
But hey, form isn't just spelling, right? It's also pronunciation. Look at this breakdown. A lot of learners actually know the spelling rule, but they completely drop the pronunciation in speech. You absolutely must dedicate real drilling time to these 3 endings. Model each category, write verbs up on the board, and have students sort them into the voiceless S, the voiced Z, and especially that really tricky sibilant is sound, like in watches or misses. Learners frequently drop or shorten that specific is ending, so you've got to drill it chorally and individually until it feels completely natural.
Now that they understand it, we move right into Step 3. Remember, making it stick.
For the next 15 minutes, the cognitive focus shifts to controlled, low-risk practice where we move those rules from short-term understanding into active memory. At this stage, errors are entirely expected and the stakes are super low. You can accomplish this through 3 quick, focused activities. First, a gap fill using a fictional person's routine. Second, a correct the error drill where you deliberately give them sentences with those typical mistakes we flagged earlier. Missing the S or double marking. And third, a fun sentence-matching race where pairs build correct sentences against the clock using subject cards and verb phrase cards. These activities keep the focus entirely on grammatical accuracy, not deep meaning just yet. As you're walking around monitoring these activities, here's another insider secret for you. When correcting drills, always ask for the why, not just the what. If a student corrects "she work" to "she works," don't just say "good job" and move on. Ask them why. Forcing them to explain the rule aloud, saying something like, "because it's third-person singular," truly reinforces their understanding and cements that grammar rule right into their memory.
Okay, let's see how this builds into step 4, internalize, personal use.
This is where the magic really starts to happen. We take that rigid form we just practiced and connect it to the student's own reality. The language becomes memorable because suddenly it's about them. A fantastic way to do this is a find someone who mingle activity. Give them a grid of statements. They have to stand up, walk around the room, and ask their classmates, "Do you drink coffee in the morning?" Or "Do you study on the bus?" But the real test happens afterward. In small groups, they have to report back on what they found. This forces them to shift from the second person, "do you," to the tricky third person. They have to say, "Ahmed doesn't drink coffee, but Lena drinks 2 cups." It's personal, it's meaningful, and it forces active use of the target structure.
Finally, we reach step 5, fluency use, spontaneous communication. In this final 15 to 18-minute block, the whole dynamic of the classroom fundamentally shifts. The message and spontaneous communication take absolute priority over grammatical perfection. The goal is to use the tense to achieve a real communicative goal. To trigger this, use an information gap activity. Imagine pairing students up to plan a schedule for 2 fictional exchange students. Student A has Kareem's partial schedule, student B has Sophia's. They have to ask each other questions like, "What time does Kareem wake up?" or "Does Sophia play sports?" just to fill in the missing gaps. Then they have to negotiate a shared weekly schedule that works for both. This creates this totally natural problem-solving need for the present simple tense, where they actually have to justify their choices. Now, what's really interesting about this stage is the shift in your role as the teacher. During the clarify and remember stages, you were completely focused on accuracy. Immediate correction was fine. But during fluency tasks, you must protect their confidence. Your job is to step back, monitor discreetly, and use delayed correction. If you interrupt a heated negotiation about Sophia's schedule just to fix an S ending, you totally kill the communicative flow. So bite your tongue and save those corrections for later.
And speaking of corrections, let's wrap up by looking at step 6, managing common student errors. Acknowledging the mistakes will still happen is just part of the teaching reality, but now you actually have a framework to handle them strategically. Consider this slide your ultimate cheat sheet for error management. If they're missing the S, it's likely L1 transfer, because it's a really small sound. Address this explicitly in clarify and remember, but only use delayed correction during fluency. If they're double marking, saying "she doesn't likes," they're overgeneralizing the rule. Hit that hard during the board work in the clarify stage. And if they're just avoiding the third person entirely in spontaneous speech, honestly, that is just cognitive overload. It is completely normal at this stage, so just quietly note it and bring it up anonymously during your final wrap-up at the end of class.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to reflect on. How will you shift the cognitive load in your next grammar lesson? It is time to finally ditch the dry lectures. By embracing the ECRIF staircase, encounter, clarify, remember, internalize, and fluency, you empower your students to stop just memorizing rules and start truly mastering the present simple. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy teaching!